The registration hall smelled like ozone and something vaguely floral that probably wasn't meant for human nasal cavities. Every species processes atmosphere differently, and the environmental processors were doing their best to keep everyone from asphyxiating while they waited to announce how magnificent they were. The human stood in line behind a creature that looked like an angry chandelier, and in front of something that might have been a sentient weather pattern. Hard to tell, really. Ahead, a Crothian war prince was finishing his introduction. The translator implants rendered his clicking mandibles into a booming declaration. About 17 genetic lines, 43 conquered territories, and something about a sacred mating ritual that absolutely nobody needed to hear about during registration. The crowd cheered anyway. Apparently, oversharing was universal. The chandelier creature stepped up to the podium, its crystalline appendages chiming like broken wind chimes, and launched into what sounded like an epic poem about its homeworld's binary sunsets. The human checked his water container, still half full. He'd learned on the transport that most species found Earth water hilarious. Something about our mineral content being what they used for industrial lubricants. He'd been drinking industrial lubricant for 3 days, and felt fine. The line shuffled forward. A Valisian champion took the podium, her scales refracting light into patterns that supposedly meant something profound. Holographic projections bloomed around her, showing 43 frozen moments of previous victories. Each defeated opponent crystallized in blue light like cosmic trophies. She spoke for 12 minutes. The human wondered if his irrigation system had flooded the lower field yet. Probably. Spring on Earth didn't wait for galactic sporting events. When his turn came, the silence happened gradually, like someone turning down volume across the entire arena. He walked to the podium, aware of several thousand eyes, sensors, and probability assessment organs focusing on him. The overseer, Quelix, shimmered in its containment field, pure thought energy wrapped in something resembling protocol. Your introduction, competitor. The human nodded. Quelix's energy field flickered with what might have been confusion. Please state your lineage, your victories, your... Another nod. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed. It sounded like a malfunctioning air compressor, but it was definitely laughter. Another voice joined in, then another. A Thessian delegate shouted something about humans being too primitive to understand basic ceremony. Someone else suggested he was mute. A third voice proposed he was simply stupid, which got more laughs. The human returned to his waiting area and sat down. The metal floor was cold, but he'd sat on colder. The container still had water. The next registration began. Something with too many legs, making dramatic gestures about ancestral honor. Across the arena, in the medical observation deck, Lais watched the biometric readings with her luminescent fingertips pressed against the display. The human's heart rate hadn't changed at all. Not during the walk to the podium, not during the mockery, not now. Either he had the emotional range of a stone, or he genuinely didn't care what several thousand advanced beings thought about him. She pulled up his entry file. Species, human, origin, Earth. Sol system. Medical clearance, standard. Combat history, blank. Genetic modifications, none detected. Cybernetic enhancements, none. The file contained less information than a shipping manifest. On the arena floor, Quelix consulted the tournament codes, ancient rules carved into crystallized law by species that had dissolved into cosmic dust millennia ago. Presence confirmed. Biometric signature verified. Verbal introduction nowhere explicitly required. The human stayed. By evening, when the registration finally concluded and the combat brackets materialized in hard light above the arena, his entry appeared as a small gray square with no text. The betting algorithms recalculated 17 times before settling on odds so long they required scientific notation. In 43 languages, commentators called him the cosmic punchline, the biological joke, the opening act before real warriors began their work. He finished his water and wondered if anyone here had figured out which stars were actually visible from the arena, or if they were all projections. The first match lasted 11 seconds, which bothered the commentators more than anyone else. They'd prepared 17 minutes of biographical content about the human's opponent, a ceremonial fighter from Darix Prime, whose species required formal announcement of each strike before delivery. Ancient tradition, sacred honor, deeply meaningful to approximately 4 billion beings who tuned in expecting philosophical discourse about the nature of combat as communication. Instead, they got a tackle that looked like someone tripping over furniture, followed by the Darix fighter tapping the mat 3 times in surrender, which, in his culture, meant either "I yield" or "please validate my parking," depending on context. The human stood up, walked back to his corner, and someone in the crowd threw what might have been fruit. It disintegrated against the energy barrier in a spray of purple juice that smelled like regret. "Well," the lead commentator said in 12 languages, simultaneously, his vocal chromatophores struggling to find the right color for profound disappointment. That was certainly a thing that occurred in physical space. His co-host, a Velician analyst with probability calculation organs where her liver should be, pulled up statistics that made even less sense than the match. "I'm showing that the human observed his opponent for 2.7 seconds before engagement, which according to my models is insufficient time to process combat variables unless—" She stopped, her scales flickering uncertainty. Unless he wasn't processing, he was just watching. In the medical bay, Lice ran her translucent fingers over the post-match biometrics, her skeleton glowing faint blue beneath skin that looked like frosted glass. The Darix fighter showed elevated stress hormones, elevated heart rate, elevated everything. The human's readings looked like he'd been standing in line at a modest grocery store. She'd introduced herself earlier, official capacity, medical oversight, entirely professional. He'd asked if the water was safe. She'd confirmed it was, then asked the obvious follow-up about whether he'd actually prepared for this tournament or just wandered in from a nearby agricultural planet. "I did prepare," he'd said, completely serious. "I watched 3 hours of previous tournaments. 3 hours. Seemed like enough. Competitors typically study for years. Yeah, but they were pretty repetitive after the first hour. Lots of announcing, less actual fighting than I expected. She'd left before she could say something unprofessional about humanity's apparent relationship with reasonable preparation. The second match took longer, mostly because the opponent, a four-armed Thessian with ceremonial blades and a very elaborate speech about ancestral moon forging, spent 90 seconds in pre-combat meditation. The human waited patiently, hands loose at his sides, looking like someone waiting for a transport that was running late. When the Thessian finally attacked, all four blades, moving in a pattern that had won 6 previous tournaments, the human stepped sideways, not dramatically, not with any particular flourish, just moved about 2 feet to the left. The Thessian's momentum carried him directly into the arena barrier, which responded to high-velocity impact exactly the way it was designed to, by redirecting kinetic energy back at the source. The medics arrived quickly. The Thessian would be fine, mostly after they figured out which arm went where. I'm starting to think, the color-changing commentator said slowly, that we may have miscalculated something fundamental about Earth combat philosophy. Or, his co-host suggested, he's just incredibly lucky, and we're watching probability have a seizure. By the third match, the betting algorithms had begun experiencing what their programmers later described as existential uncertainty. The human's odds were shortening, but nobody could explain why. He hadn't demonstrated superior strength, speed, or tactical brilliance. He'd demonstrated an almost insulting level of efficiency, like someone doing household chores who wanted to finish before dinner. His third opponent was a Vorelian combat specialist, who could predict enemy movements by reading electromagnetic field distortions. She'd won 47 consecutive matches by knowing where her opponents would be before they got there. The match ended when she predicted the human would move left, then right, then attack with a rising strike. He did none of these things. He stood completely still for 4 seconds, then gently pushed her shoulder. She stumbled, overcorrected based on predictions that weren't happening, and fell out of the ring. She sat on the arena floor for a long moment, her sensory antennae twitching in profound confusion. He didn't think about moving, she said to nobody in particular. He just moved. How do you fight someone who doesn't think? In the observation deck, Lys watched the human return to his corner and check his water container again. Her skeleton pulsed brighter, involuntary, the way her species responded to genuine curiosity. 4 species had filed formal complaints by evening. The human, apparently, was violating the spirit of something, though nobody could quite articulate what. The quarterfinals meant the arena had to activate its secondary containment fields, because 2 of the remaining fighters could accidentally destroy small moons if they sneezed wrong. The crowd had swollen to something that couldn't be called a crowd anymore, more like a gravitational event of interested beings. Lys had stopped pretending her visits to the human's preparation area were about medical compliance, Somewhere around the third time, she'd asked him a question that had nothing to do with his vital signs. "Why did you actually enter this tournament?" she asked, her skeleton dimming to what she hoped was a casual glow. He was sitting cross-legged again, container in hand. Seemed interesting. Also, the prize money converts pretty well to Earth currency. I could buy a new tractor. She waited for elaboration. None came. You're fighting beings that have trained for centuries so you can purchase agricultural equipment. It's a really good tractor. Her luminescence flared bright enough that she had to turn away, which in her species indicated either extreme emotion or the biological equivalent of a system crash. You're going to fight a Vorok next. They're functionally immortal when in combat. They regenerate faster than damage accumulates. So I've heard. And your strategy? Haven't decided yet. Probably something simple. She left before her skeleton could betray how much his approach to existential combat violence bothered her professional sensibilities. The Vorok champion entered the arena to the sound of 17 ceremonial drums that required 3 handlers each. His introduction took 9 minutes and included a genealogical chart projected in holographic fire. He'd killed 83 opponents across 4 centuries, survived direct hits from stellar radiation, and once regenerated from a single undamaged cell after a particularly enthusiastic assassination attempt. The human nodded when it was his turn to acknowledge his opponent's glory. The match began, and for the first 30 seconds, it looked like every prediction model was correct. The Vorok attacked with appendages that could shear through starship hull plating. The human avoided them, barely, looking less like a trained fighter and more like someone trying not to step in puddles. Each dodge was minimal, each movement just enough. At 1 minute, the Vorok's regeneration kicked in, healing microfractures from his own impacts. At 2 minutes, he was healing faster, compensating for increased effort. At 3 minutes, the arena's atmospheric processors flagged unusual metabolic signatures. He's not trying to hurt it, the Velician analyst said, her probability organs finally finding a pattern. He's making it heal itself. That's not a strategy, her co-host protested. That's just stalling. No, watch the energy consumption rates. At 4 minutes and 17 seconds, the Vorok collapsed. Not injured, not damaged, just empty. His regeneration had consumed every available energy reserve, trying to repair damage that kept almost happening. He lay on the arena floor, breathing, aware, and completely incapable of continuing. The silence that followed had weight to it, like the arena itself was trying to process what constituted victory. I'm going to need to file a report about this, Liz muttered, in the medical bay, her fingertips dancing across holographic displays that showed the Vorok's energy signature resembling a drained battery. And I have no idea what to write. Write that he won, her supervisor suggested. That's not helpful. Neither was the match, but here we are. The human returned to his corner while medical teams attended to the Vorok, who kept insisting he was fine, just tired, incredibly tired. Had anyone ever been this tired before? In the viewing galleries, 3 military intelligence officers from different civilizations started new files on human combat doctrine, flagging it with priority markers that meant figure this out before they figure out we're worried. The semifinal bracket appeared in hard light, and somewhere in the administrative complex, Quellix's containment field flickered with what might have been a headache, if thought energy could get headaches.
Is he breaking any rules? An adjudicator asked.
No. Is he following the spirit of the tournament? That's a philosophical question. I'm an adjudicator, not a philosopher. Then he's not breaking any rules. Back in his preparation area, the human discovered his water container was finally empty. He stood up to find a refill station, and Lysis appeared in the doorway, glowing brighter than she meant to. That was clever, she said. Thanks. Also deeply irritating to everyone who studies combat theory. Wasn't trying to irritate anyone. That somehow makes it worse. She paused, her luminescence settling into something almost comfortable. Do you even care that you're winning? He thought about it for longer than she expected. I care about doing things right. Winning just seems to be what happens when you do. The final match was scheduled for 3 hours after the semifinal, because Zoran the Infinite required that much time just to prepare his entrance. The human used the break to finally find a refill station, discovered it dispensed something that tasted like carbonated copper, and decided his previous water had been fine by comparison. Liz found him there, her skeleton cycling through colors she probably didn't intend to broadcast. Zoran has won 4 previous tournaments. His introduction alone is considered a masterwork of ceremonial combat poetry. How long does it last? 37 minutes. That's longer than some of my matches. All of your matches, she corrected. Combined. He tested the copper water again, made a face that seemed to transcend species boundaries, and set it down. Can I ask you something? Her luminescence steadied. Curious. Yes? Why do you keep visiting? I know it's not just medical oversight. She'd prepared 17 professional responses to this question over the past 2 days. What came out was, because you're the first being I've met who treats combat like a chore that needs finishing, rather than an identity that needs defending. Combat is a chore. Tell that to literally anyone else here. The arena had reconfigured itself for the final match, expanding to accommodate a crowd that now measured in the billions, across relay networks spanning 40 systems. Zoran entered, to the sound of celestial trumpets that were probably metaphorical, but sounded extremely literal. His speech covered 2 centuries of victories, philosophical insights about the nature of strength, and a surprisingly moving section about his third molt that had several species weeping openly. When Quellix finally asked if the human wished to respond, he shook his head once. Of course not, Zoran said, his vocalization organs producing harmonics that translated as profound disdain in 17 languages. Silence before inevitable defeat. How perfectly human. The match began with Zoran demonstrating techniques refined across lifetimes, each strike a culmination of centuries of practice. The human responded the way he'd responded to everything else, moving just enough, existing slightly elsewhere than where the attacks expected him to be. No drama, no flourishes, just persistent, inconvenient presence. At 4 minutes, Zoran repeated a combination he'd used at 2 minutes. At 5 minutes, the repetition became a pattern. At 6 minutes, it became frustration. The killing strike came fast, faster than anything Zoran had thrown before, the kind of technique that ended matches and occasionally damaged arena infrastructure. It should have ended any opponent. The human caught the extended appendage mid-strike, applied pressure to a joint that bent slightly wrong, and waited. Zoran's eyes widened in something that translated across species as recognition of a very specific kind of mistake. "Yield," the human said quietly. The champion tapped twice against the mat. The arena erupted into noise that the atmospheric processors couldn't quite categorize. Celebrations and protests achieving the same decibel level. Quelix materialized at the center of the ring, its thought energy flickering with bureaucratic determination. The victor will now approach for the ceremonial. The human was already walking toward the exit. "Wait, the champion's circlet must be—" He kept walking. Lies intercepted him at the departure gate, her entire skeleton blazing bright enough to hurt. "You can't just leave. There's the archive, the recording, the eternal registry." "I'm going to miss planting season. This will ripple through 47 civilizations. Military doctrine will change. Cultural philosophy will shift. You've proven something about humanity that I proved I can win a tournament. That's not really about humanity. That's just about showing up and doing the work." She wanted to argue, found she couldn't, watched him move toward his transport berth. "Will you come back if they hold another tournament?" "Depends on whether I need another tractor." He boarded before she could respond, before Quelix could insist on proper ceremony, before the betting algorithms could fully crash, trying to recalculate odds that no longer mattered. The Eternal Archive recorded his victory as unknown human because no one had gotten his name, and by the time administrators thought to check his entry documentation, the file had been automatically purged per data retention protocols. Lice returned to the medical bay, her skeleton finally settling to a dim, thoughtful glow. Her supervisor asked what she'd learned from monitoring the tournament's most unusual competitor. "That maybe we've been measuring the wrong things," she said. "Meaning?"
Meaning he won because he didn't need to win. And somehow, that made him impossible to beat.
3 systems away, military academies began teaching about the fighter who won by being unremarkable. On Earth, in a field that desperately needed irrigation before spring planting, a human fixed his water system and wondered if anyone had bothered to check whether those stars in the arena were real or just expensive decorations.